both Madhusudan and Pierre will join because Madhusudan's flight got delayed slightly. So he said that he's going to join in a while.
Yes, so maybe he's just finishing a previous meeting and
Pierre also? Okay, sure. Good morning and good afternoon, good evening to some of you. Welcome you all for this webinar on inclusive democracy, ways and means for including all sections. Today with us, we have excellent speakers. A moderator is on the way. He will join us in a couple of minutes. So let me briefly start with an introduction of the people on this call, and then we will get into the actual session. First of all, a warm welcome to all the participants joining us today. With us today on the call, we have the national coordinator for this particular working group called Delivering Democracy, Retrospect and Prospect, Dr. Basavaraju R. Shrestha. So over to you, Basavaraju, for a quick introduction.
Okay, thank you, Jayashri. A warm welcome to all the panelists of the day. Namaste, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the panelists and participants joining from various parts of the world. And I'm truly honored to be a host of this webinar as National Coordinator of Delivering Democracy Working Group. We are Delivering Democracy Working Group under G20 India. Consider this as a privilege to have this opportunity to host the speakers from Japan, EU, France, and Australia in today's webinar, and also engaged audience from India and all the other different nations. Actually, it's a matter of pride for all of us in India to host variety of engagement activities during our G20 presidency with the theme, as you know, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that is one earth, one family, and one future. Friends, our G20 presidency, the moment the India took the baton of handling this G20 presidency, our Honorable Prime Minister gave a call to make this G20 a people's campaign and not just a government's program. We under the Delivering Democracy Working Group taking G20 to the grassroots. And we are engaging various sections in the community, from students to panchayat, that is our village self-government members, to parliamentarians, and also reaching out to academicians and all of you, the democracy champions from all the G20 nations actually. Through this webinar series, our objective is to learn from all the G20 nations on the best practices and solutions for some of the problems and the issues we are actually encountering from the decades. Inclusive democracy, ways and means for all, for including all sections, is the topic of the day. We are aware the challenges when it comes to including most marginalized communities. While we pass a general statements that women are empowered, if you look at the statistics, it doesn't, the evidence doesn't support this statement in many ways. If in our own Indian situation, around 48 to 50% of women population in India are represented by only 14% of members in the People's Assembly, that is Lok Sabha, and approximately around 11% in the upper house, that is Rajya Sabha. And probably, I guess, same may be the case, a little better in other countries, which we will get to know. I was just reading through in Australia, it could be around 23% or something around. My statistics could be wrong, but we can get to understand those things. Coming to people with disability, another most marginalized section. So we till now the thoughts are restricted to providing kind of special booths or vehicle arrangements or at-home facilities for casting their vote in the election. But inclusion in delivering democracy, that is empowering them, are yet to happen in many ways. Even their share is taken by someone else, saying that no, they are not interested or they are not available to reach these benefits. Sexual minorities are now getting at least a space in many government schemes in the forms, actually in the application forms, to mention their gender and the gender status and express their need. but we have a long way to go. It is important to deliberate in this webinar whether delivering democracy is truly happening to all the marginalized sections and what can be done more to have an enabling environment for all of them in democratizing the development. I'm sure we will get to learn more on these issues, which of the focus today. And well, I think it would be, I can use a couple of minutes to say about GRAM. We at GRAM, Grassroots Research and Advocacy Movement, the Secretariat for Delivering Democracy Working Group in India, engaging with all the 4 stakeholders of development through our evidence-based policy engagement activities. GRAM researches issues at the grassroots and work with the policymakers more closely, not only as a think tank, but as a think, act, and engage tank. The organization, which was just an idea a decade ago, which was independently started without any funding or seed capital, now works across the country, handle over 100 projects, work with over 10 international research and policy think tanks, and as well as over 50 national level agencies regularly. We at GRAM taken coordination of G20 engagement group as an opportunity to build and sustain solidarity of civil society organization working for democracy and good governance in India. And I really thank Benedetto, our international coordinator for Delivering Democracy Working Group, for not only taking part in this webinar, but consistently and continuously being support to make this webinar series more effective. And I thank HSF, Ansidal Foundation for their generous support in organizing these webinars and all our other partners, actually. And my special thanks to Meg Jones, who is closely involved with India's Civil 20 working group. And I was happy to share a platform with her, a panel with her in Nagpur recently. And namaste and all, welcome to all of you again. And I look forward to witness an enriching discussion. Thank you so much, and over to Jayashree.
Thank you, Basavaraj. Can I now request Benedetto, as Basavaraju briefly mentioned, Benedetto is the international coordinator of this working group. As you see, I think his key interest area seems to be travel, human rights. He prefers the administration and the public space as a range within which to govern global processes. I request Benedetto to continue his introduction and quickly set the tone for the day.
Thank you very much to everybody, to Jaya, and namaste. So the topic of today is inclusive democracy, or the democracy of inclusion. I think that the simplest definition of democracy could be the place where everyone could be heard and discuss, to decide and act together in a community. This is as the simplest. I know that is not, complete. And so we are in this topic all together. And today we speak about democracy and inclusion. So we wish to find what are the best practices and the challenge that the democracy is confronting in these days to be more inclusive as never, with the usual definition to try to not left behind no one. So as usual, these topics could be endless. We can stay here 1 year to discuss, but what we are trying to do today is to put one more brick in the wall, in the construction, in the building, and building together a position of this working group to be sent to the G20 as a position of the civil society around the world, around the G20 country at least. So I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to steal time to our really honorable speakers, and I give you the floor to all of you. And I come back at the end just to try to wrap up your position. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Benedetto. As you all see, Benedetto has an extremely illustrious profile. He was appointed by the Prime Minister as the Chief of Cabinet in 2016, currently the President of ECCAR, European Coalition of Cities Against Racism, and also the President of the UNESCO ICAR, where he's focusing on inclusive and sustainable cities. So we, along with Benedetto, we have Madhusudan today, who is going to moderate this session. So Madhusudan again comes from the social development sector. He's a social scientist and has been working specifically in the fragile and conflict-affected situations areas as the ADB classification region. You can see the type of places that he has worked in, different sectors he has engaged in, basically worked with variety of interest groups. You can see internally displaced segment, children, old and elderly, differently abled women, a variety of different segments are the different sectors where Madhusudan has worked. And specifically, I think his focus has been inclusion. His focus also has been the infrastructure as a space. So I'm not sure if Madhusudan has already joined us right now, but he will in a couple of minutes. Coming to the speakers, again, we have excellent speakers on the panel today. Meg Jones is the Chief Economic Empowerment of the UN Women. As you see her profile, she spent a lot of time working with women as a cause. She leads the team at the United Nations that supported the establishment of the Women 20 Engagement Group under the presidency of the government of Turkey. So that's something that is a feather on her cap. Several positions in the United Nations and currently the Chief of Economic Empowerment at UN. So if you hear her, I think a lot of what she has done is in the space of women specifically, and that's something that she's going to share with us during the conversation today. So welcome you on this call, Meg. We also have Pierre. If you look at Pierre's specialization, he's currently the Director of Disabled and Elderly People Policies in a French local authority. So he's going to bring in a flavor of his experience working with disabled and elderly as a segment in today's call. Once again, you can see quite a bit of a senior profile working in France, in different areas of France, you can see. And also the member of AATF and ANDAWS. This is something that Pierre brings with him as an experience. The other thing you can see is he has written a book dedicated to inclusive society. And I think a lot of what he has experienced working with disabled and elderly people, the essence of what he has written in the book, these are the type of things that he is going to share with us today. Also today with us on call is Lauren. Lauren is the founder and managing director of Young Professionals in Foreign Policy in Tokyo. She's the founder and the managing director of this particular organization. It's a youth-led, youth-focused NGO fostering international, inclusive, and intergenerational dialogue on a variety of issues. She's also an award-winning researcher, author, speaker, and specifically advocate for women, youth, and migrants. PhD candidate herself, she's going to bring in a lot of her experience in the space of inclusiveness as a sharing in today's call. Lauren has also been part of the G7. You can see in the W20 US delegate to India. So these are the illustrious profiles with us today. And I think welcome you all again. Welcome Lauren, Pierre, and Meg to start this discussion today. I just need to do a quick check to see if Madhusudan has joined us. Otherwise, can I just request Benedetto to help us to start this? Because I think he's stuck in a flight somewhere.
Yes, of course. Let's start with the consideration. The first consideration is that women are more generous and more on time than the men. This is absolutely to point out, to summarize at the end, but also at the beginning. So I think that we can shift quickly to the first panelist. If I don't get wrong, after our prep meeting we had, because also the audience can imagine that we had a prep meeting, is Meg or Laureen? I don't remember exactly one of the two. If you can help me, please, or I can flip a coin. It's no problem, because I can ensure the audience that is valuable exactly the same, and the level is really, really high of the witnessing that we are about to hear. So Meg, up to you.
Well, actually, I was about to defer to Lauren. I think not only we have women on the
Okay.
team here, but we're deferring to, I think, youth as well. So Lauren, please.
Thank you so much, Meg, and thank you so much, Benedetto, and everybody. So my name is Lauren Power. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone. Thank you to Graham and to Jayashri Krishna, our India coordinator, the Civil 20 Engagement Group of the G20 India Presidency, and our supporters for the kind invitation and opportunity to be speaking on the topic of inclusive democracy alongside my fellow panelists and with all of you today. To begin, I'd like to give my views on the topic of inclusive democracy. What is it? Why is it important? And then I will share some of my insights from the work I've been doing to advocate for youth and women. And finally, I'd like to discuss the importance of designing, creating, and sustaining inclusive spaces for democratic participation. Of course, democracy has been present in various forms in different civilizations for thousands of years, and it's easy to see why it has endured. As Benedetto said, democracy has a focus on representation and governance and lawmaking that can ensure certain fundamental freedoms, which is certainly not the case for some alternatives such as autocracy, plutocracy, and oligarchy. But democracy as a form of government is not in and of itself a solution to all problems. Unmitigated democracy is nothing more than the tyranny of the majority and would lead to lawmaking to benefit only those in the majority group, thereby only ensuring fundamental freedoms to that majority group as well. Unfortunately, we've seen these outcomes in different societies throughout history for thousands of years, and the idea that democracies should be inclusive of non-minority groups, giving them an equally valid say in lawmaking and governance and ensuring equal fundamental freedoms for them is relatively new. In the United States, where I was born, women did not get the right to vote until 1920. It was not until the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, that Black Americans were given the equal right to vote. In Japan, where I currently live, the Zainichi, that is the ethnic Korean community that has lived in Japan since World War II, did not get the right to vote until 1995. And it would not be until 2013, when the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was ratified, that disabled people under guardianship in Japan would gain the right to vote. Young people are not given the right to vote until they can be legally counted as adults, which is usually between the ages of 18 and 20 years old. There are many groups that are still denied the full scope of their social, cultural, and political rights, including migrants, the LGBTQIA+ community, and so on. I think we can say that inclusive democracy still has much it can improve. To achieve inclusive democracy, we must focus not only on understanding and breaking down barriers, we must also come to know the needs of our diverse communities, anchor our commitments in universal human rights, empower and educate people, and design, create, and sustain inclusive spaces for democracy to flourish. Through my NGO, Young Professionals in Foreign Policy, or YPFP Tokyo, my amazing team and I seek out issues and spaces where we believe young people want to be heard and should have their voices heard. We push for representation in those spaces, and then we train, prepare, and support one another in a peer-to-peer fashion with international colleagues before sending out our delegates. Within our first 18 months, we've gained special stakeholder status to the UN and sent delegates to represent youth at the high-level negotiations. And we have also gained 2 UN endorsements to host the local conferences of youth, both last year and this year, representing all of youth voices in Japan, contributing to the COP, and helping young people in Japan to be engaged and to engage others in their communities on climate and sustainability issues. When the young people we work with see in practice that they can make a difference, when they exercise their freedoms, it is incredibly empowering for them. Then they know they can and have the confidence to pursue the next goal and the next. And also they have learned how to lift up others in their communities. They become more engaged politically. They start to envision themselves as agents of change in a broader sense. When people are meaningfully included, it is empowering and it feeds upon itself in an empowering way into the future. In my work with the W7 or Women 7 under the G7 Japan presidency this year, we accepted 93 W7 Japan advisors. These are our women and men stakeholders that advise about policy recommendations and gender equality issues to the G7 leaders. Out of those 93 people, we made sure to include about 40% from the global South and emerging economies and 20% youth. Including these voices in discussing about G7 policy may not be something that you automatically think of, but it really does change the conversation. By being more inclusive in our process, it helped our policy recommendations to G7 leaders also be more inclusive. This was a wonderful example of using a platform for democracy that already existed and then making it more inclusive. In addition, we assessed this idea and practice of inclusion within the digital landscape. This is a really evolving space, and many of us in the G20 countries are finding ourselves increasingly online and living in the digital world. This year, the W7 launched a statement called Women Transforming the Digital World, Safer and Inclusive with Prosperity for All at the W7 Summit. And we aligned it with the 2023 Commission on the Status of Women, or CSW 67, held at UN headquarters in March, during which, very famously, UN Secretary General said that at the current rate of change, gender equality would be achieved in 300 years. We know that digital technology can be an unprecedented empowering force, especially in creating democratic spaces and inclusive spaces, but only if it's designed to be inclusive and regulated for impact and safety. Unfortunately, women and girls in all their diversity are at particular risk of being excluded from the benefits of digital work, access to technology and data, and also AI. Regulation, coordinated intervention, and a gender responsive and intersectional approach to technology urgently need to be adopted in this rapidly evolving space. We emphasized that the benefits of women's inclusion and leadership in digital economies and digital spaces will not be realized until G7 leaders commit to making the digital world safer and more inclusive and more equitable. For many people, especially those who are suffering from marginalization, the digital landscape can be a very liberating space for expression and engagement. And it's important as we think of how to engage these actors in these spaces for more inclusive democracy, both now and into the future, that we hearken back to understanding the barriers historically and currently, and also how we can empower these communities. And it needs to be specific, it needs to be reviewed regularly, and there needs to be open and transparent processes and conversations where everyone is meaningfully given a seat at the table and leadership potential. So thank you so much for listening to my statement, and I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Really, really, really interesting what you said. Let me underline some word like a word cloud. That is freedom, the word that you start with, and also the verb that democracy is something that has to be continuously improved. We cannot take for granted what we have, and we cannot think that is enough. And then you focus you focus on women and youth according to your personal experience, and that is really something that you add at our discussion. Let me welcome also, sorry, other two words, educations and spaces that are to stay together. We need more spaces in which you use this formula, where freedom is something that has to be exercised. We cannot be put on the field, play freedom without a training in having the freedom to be exercised. So, and the design of democracy. Just to summarize what you did say, then let me welcome Pierre Sacmela, he's from Toulouse, voila, in France.
Hello, everyone.
If I don't remember wrong, Meg, I don't want to be rude, but I think that the second panelist decided was Pierre. So Meg is shifting from my supposing first position as speaker of the third, but you know, at least among equal, there is no numbers, ordinary numbers. So Pierre, up to you. Sorry if you didn't hear everything, but just we are asking the speaker to have a, let me say, to set a framework about inclusion and democracy. What is a inclusive democracy in your experience, and to give us some piece of, sorry, I'm Italian, I have to move my hands, sorry. And also to give us a feedback from your personal experience, your field of study and your field of work. And as Jaya already mentioned, with the elder people and disabled people. Thank you so much to be with us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Benedetto. And sorry, I missed the beginning of the webinar for technical reasons. But now everything is okay. I think I'm okay. Everybody can listen to me. That's okay. Yes, really good. So I will talk from my point of view, a French point of view, Western country point of view, and European country point of view, trying to share some ideas about democracy and inclusive democracy, ways and means for including all sections. First, I would like to insist on the crisis of democracy. There's no doubt there's a crisis. There's also no doubt that there's but democracy is the best regime we can have, and I don't know other better regime. But we have a crisis. Is it possible to cast the document I prepared? No.
I think yes.
Okay, very good. So the first two slides, it's only titles. Okay, and after that, please. Thank you very much. So there's a crisis of democracy. You all know the sentence, the Churchill sentence, 1947, about the democracy, which is the worst regime, except for all of us. This crisis of democracy is linked with two particular things. The first one is frustration. Frustration not to have the power to make the law when we are part of a section of population. And the second problem is adherence to democracy. Even when you are well informed and you can have all the processes, we have a real a genuine problem in Europe about adherence to democracy. So I will have 2 points. The first one is to, as it was suggested, to say how we deal with the problem in my administration. We are a local authority with elected people at the top of the local authority in Toulouse. And second, I would like to insist on in what one can be inclusion. How can it be understood? And the way I think is the best to promote inclusive democracy. So first, what do we do as a local authority trying to improve inclusive democracy? We it was not an obligation, but the Conseil départemental de la Haute-Garonne, my administration, decided to build a whole participatory process in order to reach this goal of inclusive democracy. First, it was a major change in the way to build and to make policies. A participative process has been spread in all our policies. Last year, we also built a kind of consultative parliament, local consultative parliament, with some people representing society. And inside policies, and particularly in the policies I am in charge of, elderly and disabled persons, we had working groups, which is very common, but also with particular goals like inclusive society, and in order to give a real possibility for persons to express from the point of view of elderly persons or disabled persons, and to have an action in all the policies, not only ours, but the whole policies on the territory. So that was a choice that has been made in our local authority. So it was an idea to go further in democracy. But the problem is that even if you have this kind of participatory democracy, it remains the problems I emphasized in the introduction. Adherence to the democracy, it's not enough to make participatory democracy, and frustration, because once you have participated in the process, you want to change, and you don't have necessarily the power. So this is a major point, I think, about inclusive democracy. And that is my second point. How can we try to revive democracy with this idea of inclusive process? And I think it's more important than the participatory process. Participatory process is necessary, but we have a more important way, which is inclusive process. There is a first idea is that we have a debate among researchers in political science, which is the way to represent in the better way the person and the sections. And so I won't enter the discussion. I want deeper the discussion. And so there is a debate about this. But I think the way to deal with the problem is not necessarily, it's a major issue, but it's not necessarily quotas or am I a part of the section or not to represent the others and all that. I think we can have a representation in the democratic process, even if we don't come from a particular section. But the difference is, and the way we must enter in deeper and deeper, it's the inclusive process itself. What is inclusion? And we use it very, very often without a clear definition. I think it has been done at the beginning. Yes, certainly. I'm sorry one more time not to have been here from the beginning. But usually everybody agrees about inclusion as the opposite of exclusion, and it's a major step. But I think we must go further. Inclusion process, in my opinion, it's a new paradigm. It's the new paradigm of adaptation to everyone. In a society, we must have norms and rules to be, and so you can, about slides, go to further. Okay, it was, okay, thank you very much. In a society, you must have some norms and some rules to be together and to live together. And so there's a kind of opposition. On the one hand, you must have a common rule which is applied to everyone. And so you must You must be in the process you are ordered to be. And on the other hand, we must promote inclusive democracy. It seems to be an opposition, and actually we can go further about this opposition and really reach an inclusive democracy if we agree about the definition of inclusion. Inclusion it's not to give the power to all sections in society. Inclusive democracy is we can reach it with a way to make common law together and to be able to adapt the law to every situation. But when do you adapt and when you must apply the rule, even if persons disagree with the rule? And I would like just to give an example to finish my words. Taking this example of the train. In a train in France, the common rule is that you must be silent. So if someone is noisy, in the previous system, everybody told the person, okay, you must stop, no noise, you must be silent. But what happens if someone is disabled, for instance, and his disability or her disability leads his or her to be noisy? And the former answer in France was to tell his or her to be in another train coach, which is segregation. And inclusion is to adapt the rule, but not to the will of the person because she wants to phone or he wants to phone or they want to do something and ready to accept that everyone is noisy. We must adapt the rule, and so to accept that it's not silence, depending on abilities to persons. If the person is disabled and she only be noisy, we must in this way accept that the rule is adapted. But if it's because the person wants to have another rule alone, without discussion, without making a common law, we must say, sorry, but the law at that moment is this law, and so you must apply it because you can apply it. And this is very important, I think, to promote inclusive democracy this way in order to combine this adaptation to everyone and this common law. So I think you understand the metaphor for all the process in making the law, the common law. And in my example, you can notice that the law, silence, is only a law, a construction, a social construction. It can change, but it can change with a common process and with discussion in order to make it evolve. So you understand, and it's my conclusion. So please, the next slide. Inclusion is, in my opinion, the solution to revive democracy. And if we want to go in this way, we must also build democracy from the ground, particularly in France, where the country is very centralized, as maybe you know. And so we must, from the ground, have a democracy process every day. I mean, we must discuss and decide together in our area, and it will be the way this whole process as a society, inclusive process in society, and from the ground every day in a daily democracy basis to be able to decide what are the trees in my street and all that. I think this is the way to reach and to revive the democracy. So thank you very much, and I'm ready to answer some questions if there are.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Really clear how to revive this democracy that is in crisis creating spaces, as you mentioned, when the voices could be heard, but also to don't take the process to an end, but it's a continuous process of adaptation and to put together the people. This is one of the first, I think, common ground that democracy and who wish to live in a democracy and build a democratic process has to accept. So, and also that is interesting, the accent that you pose on the idea of is not a competition, is not something that ended to exercise. Of course, that's our main point to take clear in our horizon. And then there is the process to do. So let me shift to Meg as to see, hello, it's your turn now. And so as to can reach and fulfill this process, how is your experience, but also before a general framework? Thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you so much, Benedetto, and my very warm thanks also for the Delivering Democracy group of the C20, which is of course part of the G20, for the generous invitation to participate in today's webinar. And I'd also like to thank and acknowledge the very good work that Graham does on the ground with grassroots community. I did have the pleasure and the honor of sharing a panel with Dr. Basafaraju at the C20 summit in Nagpur earlier this year. And I learned more about the work of Graham, and I am very impressed by the work there and your commitment to democracy indeed. So it's a pleasure also to be on this webinar. I've stepped away from my role as Chief of Economic Empowerment at UN Women. I was there for several years. Before that, I was at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the International Trade Center, that they're both bodies in Geneva, part of the United Nations. And I've worked as an academic, and I've done several other jobs, which bring me here today. And it's always a pleasure to hear voices that have, from people who've invested in studying and putting together a timeline, if you will, like Lauren has done for us, laying the stage today for this very important topic. And she has, of course, addressed women, a topic close to my heart and my professional experience for many years. And so that was an excellent foundation that Lauren gave, and I'd like to build on a few pieces of that. And indeed, Pierre, you were really hooking into this idea of common law and the participation in the formulation and realization of the right to formulate laws and to have those be dynamic and fluid to meet the needs of society over time. So these are 2 points that I'd like to base my comments on this. Now, unfortunately, it was true. The Secretary General did say that it's going to take 300 years to reach gender equality at the current rate. In fact, we have gone backwards. So I'd just like to take a look at the international stage, our backdrop, and then zoom into the local for a good practice, zoop up through state and federal political processes. And then for a bit of a change, I'm going to throw in the private sector here as well in some of my remarks as I round up. So where are we on the international stage? Well, at the moment, we have, in terms of inclusion and a somewhat democratic process, we have the United Nations. This is the voice where our international conventions are adopted. They're negotiated there, they're adopted there, all the representatives of the member states there participating with equal rights to do so and in equal formula. So we have that at the international level. We have the United Nations. With that, one of the first international agreements that came out of the United Nations was the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And this recognized the equal rights of men and women. And one would think that would be great. We could park it there, and hopefully women and men could participate equally in all aspects of society. But no, it wasn't until 1979 that we had the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. And they went as far as to say all forms. It wasn't just an international convention against discrimination against women. It was all forms, because it was recognized there were so many forms. And so this particular covenant it's broken down to several areas of focus. But I just wanted to share Article 3 with you, because this is really at the heart of that convention itself. So Article 3 says that all states which sign on to this particular convention, all all states must take all appropriate measures, including legislation, to ensure the full development and advancement of women for the purpose of guaranteeing their exercise and enjoyment of their human rights and fundamental freedoms on an equal basis with men. So this is Article 3. So it's talking about the full enjoyment of human rights. And one of those rights is actually political participation. So this is why many of the countries that have signed on to that, one of the first areas they looked at was actually the participation of men and women in Parliament. And in Australia, that the CEDAW, as it's known, was adopted in 1979. Australia signed on in 1983. So we were one of the first countries to sign on to CEDAW. And we were the first at that time. We took a long, hard look at the participation of men and women in Parliament, and it was very telling. At that stage, 10 years later, in 1994, we only had 12% women in federal Parliament, and so it was miles away from the 50% target. So what one of our political parties then decided to do was to set a quota. There's that word that people. It's very polarizing. People like it or they hate it. Very polarizing. But in 1994, one of our parties decided to set the target of 35% of their representatives being women. And so, and even although that helped, it hasn't got us to the stage where we're close to 50% representation in Australian politics today, unfortunately. So when people ask me about quotas, I'm like, well, we've had that here in Australia now for quite some decades. And although the needle has moved, we are not there yet, even in Australia. And we've only had only one female prime minister from 2010 to 2013. So the situation still requires, we still require what underlies a policy. So this is the thing: when a policy or a law is adopted, there needs to be commitments by in this case the government to realise those policies. It doesn't matter what it is. And the first thing that you need to realise any policy is budget. So there's the budgetary aspect of this, and then there's the awareness raising, yeah? Because a government can adopt a policy. They can say, look, at the federal level, they could say we want 50% women, but if there's no budget towards that, and if the women don't know that that policy is even there, they're not going to avail themselves of the opportunity to participate. So I think this brings us to a very important part of the democratic process. It is that in Australia we have a representative democracy, which means that we represent our parliamentarians, our elected politicians are there to represent the people, which means as taxpayers, we expect them to use our taxpayer dollar in a way that represents the people. Yeah. So because we have a diverse community in Australia, it means that we expect our government to spend some of our taxpayers' money realising some of our policies, whether it's gender equality and women's participation in Parliament, or whether it has to do with migrant voting, educating migrants on the voting process, for example. We expect our government to use some of our taxpayers' dollars in those very important areas. So, and I think that's, when we're talking about inclusive processes, I think we need to remember a couple of things. One is that they cost. They're not free, you know. There needs to be an actual dollar value applied to that. And in your lobbying efforts, in our lobbying efforts for support, we need to make that link between our representatives in Parliament who are meant to represent us and our taxpayer dollars that we send in for them to do a job, which includes representing our interests, which includes all of our interests, which includes the disabled, LGBTQI. It includes, you know, that there is a spectrum there. So when I'm thinking about inclusive democracy, what I'm thinking about is the litmus test, the measurement of how our government, our elected representatives are performing in terms of representing the people, in terms of budget allocation. And money does speak louder than words, I think, in this particular instance, how our government is performing in budget allocation in terms of enabling and facilitating an inclusive democracy. So going from the big picture, coming back down to just one example from Australia. I've now moved back to Australia. And in Victoria, we have a high multicultural population here. And we have an electoral commission here, the Victorian Electoral Commission, which I think is outpacing some of the other state-based electoral commissions in terms of its outreach and inclusion of migrants, in terms of the budgets that's spent on the migrant education program. And here, for example, we have budget has been spent to identify 35 democracy ambassadors who work in 43 languages across our migrant community on voter education. Because one of the Australian Electoral Commission at the national level, one of the core reasons for what we call voting failure, not quite donkey voting, but failure on the ballots, was people not actually understanding how to complete the things. So people not understanding the ballot, and so not being able to exercise their democratic right to vote because they didn't understand what it said. So our government has invested money in migrant education in several languages, and indeed instituted a democracy ambassadors program for those people to go into communities and train people on what it is an election is, because for many of our migrants, they're drawn from communities where democratic participation was just not possible. It just wasn't a feature of the governance of the countries from which they come. So there's education around that. And I must say that one of the groups which has become most active in Australia has been migrant women in participating in voting and so on. It's been quite interesting to see women who come from typically from backgrounds which where they didn't have much voice or choice to now participate actively in the Australian voting system. So at the international level, we have the United Nations. We had the Universal Declaration we had the UN Charter, which enshrined gender equality. We had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which enshrines the equal rights of men and women in 48. And then in 79, we had the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women in 1979. Even in Australia in 94, when we introduced that target, that quota in one of our parties, it still hasn't been realised. So on the one hand, while we're trying to achieve gender equality in Parliament, we're also trying to ensure that migrant women understand what it is, what a representative democracy is, and what inclusiveness is, and how to actually exercise that right to participate in that. So that's at the state level, and I've touched a little bit on the federal level. But what I'd really like to do is also skip over just a little bit and talk about what's happening in the domain of the private sector. I know it's not on the ticket today, but I think it's something that we shouldn't overlook. Increasingly, we have what's called shareholder advocacy, which means shareholders in large companies actually coming together and on specific issues, to be vocal on specific issues that the companies may or may not be involved in, whether they want them to move towards something or away from something. And what we find in Australia is based, obviously, that we've got many companies in the extractive industries, and we've got increasing shareholder activism around areas like environmental concerns and so on. This is very important. And whilst this is happening, the environmental concerns are there, we have an amazing amount of power coming through through groups such as superannuation institutional fund holders, which hold multi-billion dollars in funds, now moving towards considerations around environmental, social, and governance aspects, ESG aspects, and using that power also coming through with the shareholder activism to sort of like broaden the base and in some ways the scope of issues that have typically been considered human rights issues are now being considered more in the private sector as well. So you're seeing a greater awareness about gender equality, whether it's on boards or in women's opportunity for onboarding and the retention of women and the promotion of women, hiring promotion of women in the private sector as well. That's coming through as well. And may I say, also in India. You've had a recent, it was in January, that the Indian Stock Exchange has made it beholden on the top 1,000 publicly listed companies to report on ESG, environmental, social, governance concerns as well. So you can see some of the human rights aspects will be coming through there as well. And there's a lot going on there. So, and I mention that because I expect that many of those who've tuned into this particular webinar, which is being run by the Delivering Democracy Working Group of the C20, are probably interested in avenues for exercising their voice. You know, if you're advocating for if one of your areas of concern is trafficking, for example, human trafficking, how and where can you raise concerns around that? Of course, you can do that at the local level, and this is where this all ties in. Whether it's CEDAW or migrant women, teaching them how to vote. If you teach them how to vote, they can. There's an avenue there. If they're concerned about trafficking in the local community, they start to gain access into a world that is outside the home, which is part of the local community. It's an area where laws are not only made, but they're exercised. So there's a gradual awareness raising, understanding of the environment, the legal environment. To Pierre's point about common law, you know, once you come into this is an avenue. Voter education is an avenue to get into the local community and understand the laws, to understand the people, and then to be able to have voice in the areas of concern, which could, of course, include trafficking. And again, so that's very important. The education, the spending the taxpayer dollar at education at the local level is extremely important. And then once you understand local elections, you can understand state-based elections, and then of course the federal election. And once you've got that nutted out, then, you know, if you band with others, you can become active at the G20 level through the C20, for example, as we are now. And this is also an excellent exercise if you want to get involved in the international platform. If you are interested in the Convention on All Forms of Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, there is a periodic reporting every 4 years. The member states report to, usually 4 years, to the committee on CEDAW, the CEDAW committee, and that's the government reporting, but there is a provision there for what's called shadow reporting as well, for NGOs to come to submit reports to those committees, including CEDAW committee, for example. So here's just a couple of ways you can exercise your capacity to be included in some of these forums. But let me say, as I said at the outset, and I'll say it again at the end, you can have inclusive democracy, but the people who voted in to make those decisions, who are guiding these processes, also need to allocate the budget for inclusiveness. That's really important. Thank you.
Wow, what a race. No, thank you very much for your work, but thank you very much to all the three panelists. Before to take some, to give you some consideration that I had, I remember the audience that there is the Q&A section in which you can put your question to the panelists and I report to them, or they can absolutely read it by themselves also. But so, this idea is, we can say that to exercise democracy, in all the three speech, I heard that we need space, people, of course, time, and budget. These are the four. But there is also a before of this moment that is gave to the people by the education. Could be education of the democracy that is a way of life, is a state of mind to be lived every hour of our life. That could be for the newcomers in a country, but also that maybe are coming from a country that is less democratical, let me say, with a different rule to be together as a community. And so it is normal when you enter in a house or in a hotel, there are specific rules to be respected, but also a way to stay in that community, and you have to know at the first. Then there is the education of the youth, let me say, also of the kids, just to start from the kidhood to be really aware which are your power, because this is another thing. Power is not just the power, intended like I'm a power person, I have the power in general, but power to do something, power to say something, power to decide something. This is the real fact in which we can live. And so there is also from the first education, that there is the second one, spaces, people, and budget and time for, let me say, lead the democracy. And then there is some outcome that could be specific, that are outcomes like quota, or outcomes like participation meeting in which a minority could be held from the majority. Because also this is absolutely a challenge for our present democracy. Where is the space in which not only all together we can say what we think, but maybe somebody that has less power for their voice to be heard, try to speak and can speak to the majority, that in fact in a democracy is the people that take, is the group that takes the decision for everybody, that is affecting everybody. And so, interesting also, the point that was raised by Meg, that is the private sector. So, you know, I'm 50 years old. And as far as I remember in my life, I started to be involved in politics and so on, because in my family there was this interesting, and so I paid attention. And as the first general secretary election, I remember there is no, of United Nations, there is no first speech of the elected secretary general that didn't mention the idea that we need to change the United States, the nation system. We have to reformulate how we stay together and so on. But at the end, all this change really are difficult, but that it is. Then we are living in a world in which the private sector also play a real role also in the democracy. We didn't mention, but we can mention the media power, and not only the traditional media power, that is the, you know, the fourth power that we have in a democracy, that is the real check and balance. A time when once a journalist told me, my work is to be present in the decision room, to open the window and to describe outside what is happening inside. And that is a power also. And the education that people need to read the news on the newspaper, to know something about the system of the newspaper. I wanna, before to give some feedback, ask to some feedback of my statement to the speakers, I wanna conclude with this simple story that happened to my father. My father was in a time an elementary school teacher. And we are speaking about the early 90s. So it's 30 years ago, I was 20. And I remember my father that he was used to give to the last year student this exercise every weekend, asking them with their family to buy different newspapers, 3 newspapers from different, location, political imprinting, and to underline the same news and to find the differences on how the different newspapers, they report the same news in different ways. And that was usual for him. That was happened in the early 90s in Italy. There was a flea from Albania that regained independence and change, and a lot, thousands and thousands came to Italy. It was a different time also to treat the migration in Europe at that time. There was a solidarity generally, and the states decided thousands and thousands of people in a country like Italy to divide them in the different regions. So also till the classroom led by my father, there were Albanian students. They were speaking some Italian well, thanks to the television during the year that was captured by Albania. And so he gave also to the Albanian students came to his class, the same weekend work with the newspaper. What's happened? Happened that the first time that came back, they were underlining also the piece of advertise in the newspaper. Why that? Because in the communist Albania, there were only just one newspaper led by the political communist, the Communist Party, without advertise. They never saw in a newspaper the advertise, and they took the advertise as a news. And they say there are news that exactly are the same in every newspaper, with the same picture, with the same text, and so on. So what did tell us this story? That you need also for the news system and the media system, the social network system, to be educated on how to read it. Otherwise, to establish what is a news and what is a fake news. And what about the artificial intelligence now that can absolutely, you know what's happened yesterday in US with the fake picture that for some minutes confused also the stock exchange in New York about the attack of the Pentagon. So the capacity of humanity to establish what is truth and what is not. And so these are complex, but we cannot anymore in 2023 treat democracy only speaking about these usual democratic bodies that we have, that are the elected body in a direct or undirected. No, there is this private world that how can be managed and thought in a democratic way. They cannot be just under control, and they ask responsibility. Somebody speak about the social responsibility of the private sector, social and ecological responsibility to that. So I don't know, I was a bit confusing, but just to put some other inch to you and just to have a round back with our, just to enlarge but focused in a sense to our inclusion democracy debate. So I will restart with the same order. So Laureen, then Pierre, then Meg, and then I remember to the audience if there are question and answer. Until now there is not. I'm sorry, I was checking. And so Laureen, up to you because we have 20 minutes.
Thank you so much. I think I saw a question earlier that was regarding about the effects of COVID-19, maybe bringing common people more closely connected to the government. I think that what we saw in Japan as well, I would say, and in many countries, digital solutions were necessary. So digital solutions were necessary because people were required to be in isolation. They couldn't be out in public life in a conventional sense. So I think that this expansion, you know, we leaped forward in our digital landscape by many years in a really short amount of time. During the beginning of COVID, maybe 2020, it really forced us to do that. So we are still living at those outcomes. And I think that, in my opinion, a lot of people did increasingly live in the digital space. And I think that it did, in some sense, force governments, if they wanted to deal with the kind of crisis, different types of crisis that they were facing, and also if they wanted to communicate containment measures that different governments were implementing, they had to leverage those digital spaces. And that was a great equalizer in a sense, because a lot of things were used as touch points with common people that may not have been used before. And there was a sense of accessibility because all you needed was your smartphone, and it was at hand, and you felt very connected. I think that as we think about just another word on this digital landscape and the fact that not only are all of us increasingly living in a digital world, but in fact, for future generations, we can anticipate this trend perhaps continuing. And when I say living in a digital world, I don't just mean, oh, we have a LinkedIn account or we have a Facebook account. I mean that our banking is online, our data is there, we're being tracked, we're being monitored, our preferences are being recorded. So we have a digital alias that's always present. We have a digital presence even when we are not present in that moment digitally. And I think that when we think about inclusive democracy, not only do we have to think about what kind of violations this space might bring in the future and also at present, but it also brings us a really wonderful sense of empowerment, because it can be that kind of accessible, liberating space where suddenly we are equalized to some extent, that it can be that, and it can offer more communication pathways, more touch points. But I think that at the moment, it's a highly unregulated space. And that's one of the things that we were advocating for quite heavily. And I think G20 India is also carrying forward this kind of advocacy to the leaders, how we can get the maximum benefits from this while also safeguarding the human rights and dignity of people. It's not a safe space for everybody. We talked a lot about women's rights, women's empowerment, CEDAW. What does CEDAW look like in a digital world? We have a lot of technology facilitated gender-based violence. When someone suffers from that, they may self-censor, or their guardians or friends or family may say to them, oh, you shouldn't be on the internet. It's not good for you. This could happen again. And then they would self-censor. They would withdraw from that space. Then their access drops, their potential to use that space drops. It shouldn't be this way. It should be safe. There should be a sense of human dignity and human rights, even in the digital space, that allows for different types of representation and participation. Public sector, private sector, civil society sector, it should be safe. And I think when we think about trying to bring more people into democracy, Pierre highlighted how democracy is in crisis. One of the crises is, of course, lack of participation. We see that dropping, and especially amongst young people. Some young people are very active. I like to think I'm pretty active, but I think that, but I think that a lot of people feel very discouraged, and they feel very distrustful, and they feel that these spaces don't serve them. And I think that we need to be meeting people where they are. Digital is a great way to do that. It's also a great way, as Benedetto said, to bring forward that educational capacity, letting people know where the information is, how to get their hands on it, having accessibility to it at all times, and having it updated in real time. I think that there's a lot of benefits that we can capture. So that's kind of my word, following up on some points. Thanks so much. Over to the next.
Thank you so much. So Pierre, up to you, the floor. And remember that it's not in the question and day, but in the chat. And there is some question, I can add it, that is, how can we appreciate the democratic inner practices of ethnic groups while including them in democracy? And whether reservations helps to ensure participation and power to the excluded communities in democracy. Do we have any other enabling models? So our two more questions to you. I know I don't want to be a confusion maker, but maybe I am. But so you are the speaker, not me.
Okay, I'm going to try to make the link between your points, the previous points, Benedetto, Lauren, and also the question which was written by Jayashri. What I understand with all our words, it's that it is really important to make a link between this participatory process and this power to change things, because I think everybody understands that it cannot have all the power, but there's a big frustration, I insist on this point, about the fact to participate, to say a lot of things, and 2 years after, it's always the same, it's against the same, and it's very exhausting. And regarding to this point, and also the question of Jayashri, which is about ethnic practices, if I understand well, ethnic practices how do you deal with the fact to have special rules of ethnic practices and common rules about the from the state stage or the national stage or international stage? And I think in both cases, there's also a need. You said, Benedetto, 4 conditions: space, people, time, budget. I totally agree. There's also a need for mediators, people who make the link between the stages or the different rules, because at the first sight, we see opposition and we think competition, and we think, okay, we must have a choice, and who is the strongest? Of course, it's the natural law, so it remains, and it's part of our human nature, okay. But in our human processes, we can also have this coordination and this consensus. And I'm going to give an example, 2 examples, if I can, if I have time. I'm going to do it quick. The first example is about this mediator role, and after I will talk about ethnic specific communities rules and common rule. Okay. The first example is an example regarding my humble practice about this group, this working group about inclusive society. We have a lot of disabled persons in it, and they fight for inclusive society since the 20th century. So it's very long, but they don't manage to see evolutions with their fights. Not enough. And actually, little by little, I have become a kind of mediator, because with my responsibility as an administration, but also with this role of animator, you say, you understand? Yes, of the working group. We tried to reach some common definitions and common basis, and to go forward. And I think we have some results about the fact that we have a common interest, even if we have differences, different opinions about some things, but the bases are common. And in this way, we can go further. Administration with its rules and all the processes, and very heavy sometimes, and this strong will to be more inclusive. And I think it's something which is satisfactory for them, because we don't make a revolution immediately, but we really step by step go further. And so there are some outcomes of the will and the processes on the ground. And my second example, and after I will, I may be too long. No, it's okay? Okay. So second point, and I'll stop. About ethnic rules and common rules. If I just follow my French point of view and a very universalist approach and all that, I will say, okay, communitarism, it's not my culture. And so in this way, ethnic practices, it's okay for the private life, but from public life, no way, it's the common rule and all that, because it's a French culture. In other cultures, of course, it's different. And actually, the trick would be to say, okay, there is only one rule, and we must prevail this rule. I think the way to deal with it, without putting aside our convictions, it's this role of mediator. How do you take these practices, ethnical practices and common practices, and how do we go to the needs which are behind these practices? And in this way, we can reach consensus and build something which is adaptation, but also not forgetting the common rule. I'm very maybe optimistic, but I think it is the way it can work, at least in France. It's over for me.
Thank you very much, Pierre. We have 8 minutes left, so to Meg.
I think I'll just speak to was 2 points. One is that to be inclusive, we need to think about the environment that we want people to come into. And this includes the timing of the meetings. Typically, women can't always come to meetings which are taking place, whether they're political or otherwise, between 4 and 6 p.m. because there are responsibilities for picking up children and preparing meals and so on. So we need to think about the timing of the whatever it is we want people to be part of. And then also, whilst we focus so much on these target groups, whether it's an ethnic group or if it's a women's group or whatever, there needs to be, I think, some consideration given to the need to address the majority and talk about the fact that the minorities are coming in now and what that means, because I've worked for my whole life on the economic empowerment of women. And it's only recently that we've talked about engaging men and boys as a thing. We actually have that as a sub-theme. As you know, I'm the international coordinator for the C20's Gender Equality and Disability Working Group. And we have a sub-theme on engaging men and boys on gender equality and disability, because we can empower women, but we need to also work with men to help them understand what it means to work side by side with an empowered woman, to raise empowered daughters, to have an empowered wife. I think this is a very important part too. So whilst we're talking about inclusion, it sounds like you're trying to put more people into a small space or something. Well, if that's what you're going to do, you're going to have to talk to the people who are already occupying the space about what that's going to mean, So in as much as we can have education programs in many languages and talk about, this and that, we also, I think, need to look at the majority and have that discussion around what this transition, because it's not going to be overnight, it is going to be a transitory process, and the degree to which both sides have some awareness of the fact that I'm just not invited in to stay the way I am as an ethnic group or whatever, and I don't get to maintain my space to have more people in the room. It's not that. Like you're saying, Pierre, about this role of mediation and mediators and so on, there needs to be a dialogue about, or a discussion at least, about what that is, with consideration to the time of the meeting, other aspects in the room, sitting arrangements, all that. It's an interesting challenge, but it's certainly worth it in the longer term for us to share the planet that we live on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Meg. Thank you very much, everybody. If there is last question and a point but is not raised, if somebody has wish to add something, I think that's otherwise I can proceed with summarize that. Being also the moderator, I added that during the process of our webinar, but so I think that's for that, if you agree, these 4 words that I use to wrap up, that are spaces, budget, people, and time, are 4 pillars that an inclusive path, an inclusive democracy has to take in mind. Listening to the needs of the people. Then under these pillars, there is a common ground of the people to understand what is the aim, the general goal, that is to live together as a community that could be local as international or global. And that common ground in which these 4 pillars, they stay and stand is the education. We need to be educated, also a critical education, something that is not, it's funny that the democratic definition of what democracy is something in a negative way. So is the better way we found till today to manage our life together. So it's funny because to have a positive definition means also there to be inclusive, hearing the people thoughts about the living together, to protect minority. This is, if we think, and we are people that is managing these topics, it's time, from a long time, we need the process that humanity took, as Meg recalled in the first speech she had, is a path. And it's something that is improving, but we cannot take for granted everything that we are today, because it's always in danger or in crisis. So we need to give this message to the G20 that is please leader, because the fifth pillar, I think, is leadership. And to have leaders that are at disposal, not just to look at the poll, but to look at the reality, to remember that people has just one life and they work to live this life in dignity and to be able to reach their dreams and to as a life that is a proper life and not only something that is a struggle to say to the other, here I am, listen to me. I think that this is the message to the leadership of the G20 that we have to put with all the things that we say. So I thanks really, 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 really thank you, all of you that take the speak. Thanks the audience, thanks the organizer and so on. I think my role is finishing here. Thank you very much indeed. From Rome is all.
Thank you, Benedetto. Thank you for stepping up as a moderator for the day to deal with the temporary crisis. Thank you, speakers, Pierre, Lauren, and Meg. You guys were amazing. And I think a lot of learning nuggets for me personally. And I'm sure participants also have a lot to take back. And we as a working group have a lot of information to take back to the leadership team. Thanks again for participating and supporting us today, and look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
See you, everyone.
Thank you very much. See you.
Bye-bye.